2023 NEHEP Partnership Summit. Moderated chat with Christine Ha, MasterChef Season 3 winner. March 17, 2023, Bethesda, Maryland.
Now, I am extremely excited to welcome our special guest for today. Some of you may recognize her as a winner of MasterChef Season 3 with Gordon Ramsay, or a few of you may have even eaten at her restaurants in Houston. And so Christine Ha is a blind cook whose first cookbook, Recipes from My Home Kitchen, was a New York Times bestseller. She has spoken about disability advocacy at the United Nations and served as a culinary envoy overseas for the American Embassy. The James Beard Foundation named her first restaurant in Houston, The Blind Goat, as a semifinalist for the 2020 Best New Restaurants in America. She opened her second restaurant, Sin Chow, in September 2020 with Chef Tony Nguyen, and the James Beard Foundation named them as finalists for Best Chef Texas Region in 2022, as semifinalists for Outstanding Chef in 2023. Her third concept, Stuffed Belly, is coming this spring. Very shortly, Christine will join us to chat with NEI Director, Dr. Michael Chiang, and NEHEP Planning Group member, Dr. Penny Rosenblum. After the chat, we'll have an opportunity to ask Christine questions. But before we welcome her, let's watch a short video clip of Christine competing for the coveted title of MasterChef. Now, it is my honor to welcome our moderators, Dr. Chiang and Dr. Rosenblum, and our guest of honor, Christine Ha. Please join me in welcoming.
Christine, thank you very much for being here with us, and that was an amazing video. Let me introduce myself, and we'll have Penny introduce herself, and then we'll start by chatting with you a little bit. So I'm Michael Chiang. I'm director of the National Eye Institute, a middle-aged Asian American man with black hair that's peppered with gray, and wearing a blue jacket. I'm very excited to be here.
Hi, I'm Penny Rosenblum. I am also middle-aged and have some peppering going on with the hair. I have glasses, and amazingly, I managed to pick a blazer that has some green in it for St. Patrick's Day, black pants, and a black shirt.
I'm Christine Ha. I have no idea if I have gray hair. I'm visually impaired. I think it's, my haircut is short. It's dark brown naturally. I'm wearing, I think, a gray sweater dress and then some black leggings and a black thermal heat tech stuff underneath. So, and I'm Asian American, middle-aged as well.
Christine, we are so excited to have you here. As you know, that at the National Eye Institute, we deal with we and the people in this room deal with a constituency that really involves the entire American public. And I think it came out in the remarks that were made by Julia, by Kira, and by Jim, that involves, for people who have a healthy vision, we want them to keep it that way, through things like screening and education programs. For people with disease that's treatable, we want to make sure people get treated and we can develop the best treatments and people have access to care. And for people who have disease that's currently not treatable, we want to expand opportunities. And so it's in that spirit that we're really, really excited that you're here. Because I think that there's a lot that we can talk about that's going to be of interest to everybody who's here. Another thing I want to say on a personal note is that I have two daughters, and their ages 17 and 21 right now. And we went for about 20 years and we didn't watch a single TV show. And that changed in the pandemic. But there were two exceptions to not watching a TV show. One of them was sports events, because we have, the kids grew up playing sports and we watched a lot of it. And the second is cooking shows. And so both my kids love cooking shows. And so I feel like I'm sitting next to a celebrity right now because of that. And if I can ask the first question, it's basically, Christine, can you just tell us a little bit about yourself and your background and how you came to lose vision?
Yes. I was born in Southern California. And my parents had come here in 1975, right when the fall of Saigon was happening, so at the end of the Vietnam War. So they were Vietnamese refugees, had me in the US. I was raised in Houston, grew up with full vision, went to college in Austin, graduated college. It was around this time in my early adulthood that I started noticing one of my eyes, the vision was blurry. So naturally, I went to the optometrist thinking it was, well, first I thought it was my contact lens, then I went to the eye doctor, went through the usual tests at the optometrist, and then they told me it was actually something neurological. So then I was sent to a neuro-ophthalmologist, went through a battery of tests with their clinic. So I had several MRIs, I had a lumbar puncture, like just doing all sorts of tests. They were originally thinking I had MS because what they discovered was I had optic neuritis or inflammation of the optic nerve. So my eye was perfectly healthy, my brain was fine, but the nerve tissue that connected the eye to the brain, I don't know why I'm sitting here trying to explain science and medical terms to a room full of but anyway, so I usually have to explain this in layman's terms for many people, for university students and whatnot, but you get the idea. So basically the image my eye was taking in was kind of fractured and my brain couldn't read it. So optic neuritis, they said, usually is in someone of my age in early 20s, points to signs of multiple sclerosis. But no matter what, all the MRIs and the tests they did came back for MS negative. So it wasn't until a few years later, when I had started my first job in the corporate world, after I'd graduated undergrad, that I started experiencing tingliness and then eventually numbness in one of my legs. So it felt like my foot was asleep, but no matter what, I couldn't bring the feeling back. So I went back to see a neuro-ophthalmologist. They ran the same tests again. Still negative for MS, but they said, well, you've had 2 different exacerbations that point to MS, so we'll just by default diagnose you with MS. And I went on the usual MS therapies, the daily injections I had to do, but several years went by, and regardless of the therapies I was on, I still continued to get neurological attacks. So I remember losing my vision to the point where I couldn't see anything. Like right now, I do see some light, some contrast of color. And I do remember another spinal cord inflammation where it was so bad that over a period of a few days, I became completely paralyzed from the neck down. So couldn't sit up, couldn't will my hand to like pick up a glass of water, obviously couldn't walk. That actually took 9 months to recover from. A lot of physical therapy, occupational therapy, a lot of medication. And then at that time, the Mayo Clinic came out with a biomarker that was able to correctly diagnose me with neuromyelitis optica, or NMO for short. Now it's known as NMOSD for spectrum disorder at the end. So when I was correctly diagnosed, I was put on correct treatment for my NMO, but I recovered well from the spinal cord inflammation, but unfortunately, I think after having so much optic nerve inflammation in both of my eyes over the years, like my optic nerves, I was told had atrophied. So that's kind of how I gradually lost my vision in my 20s. Coincidentally, it was around this time that I was also really starting to teach myself how to cook and enjoying cooking. And the story behind that is I started cooking out of necessity, because when I went off to college, I realized I missed a lot of my mom's home cooking, like her Vietnamese food that I grew up eating. And she actually died when I was young and never taught me how to cook. So it was kind of my life mission to try to recreate her dishes so that I could enjoy them in adulthood. So by trial and error, I just experimented a lot in the kitchen, and then realized I loved being able to cook for other people and feed other people and bring joy into their lives through something as simple as a bite. So that's when I think my love for cooking grew, but it was really just a hobby, and it wasn't until I went on MasterChef, and the show is for all amateur home cooks, and then winning that 3rd season that kind of launched the culinary side of my career. So that's about me in a nutshell.
Well, that's pretty amazing, Christine, and I think we were all pretty awed by the video, and I had fun to admit I don't watch a lot of TV, but I did look up a couple episodes of MasterChef season 3, so I would be prepped for today. But as somebody else who has a visual impairment and is always kind of figuring out, well, what are appropriate accommodations? What can I ask for to still be equitable? So people don't think I'm getting extra help, but that I'm having an equal playing field. Can you talk a little bit about the accommodations and your negotiation process with the folks at MasterChef?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So I did get that question quite a bit in interviews during the show and after the show, because they noticed, like, if you watch my season, I did have a sighted guide or like an aide. So she we were put under very strict rules. There was a legal team from Fox on set almost every day listening into our conversation. So they wanted to level the playing field, but not give me an advantage. So she was like, the rules were she wasn't allowed to touch my food, taste my food. She was just an extension of like me, meaning if I needed something from the pantry, like a mixer, I could ask her to go get me a mixer, but that means essentially that's like me running to the pantry. So I have to step back from my station and not touch anything. Even if like the food was on fire, like, it's as if I were in the pantry looking for a mixer. So I had to just, not touch anything. I couldn't ask her things specifically like, oh, does this piece of steak look done? I would have to ask like, what color is this steak? Is it red, pink, brown, black? And then from that, I would kind of be able to deduce using my other senses to like whether the steak was overcooked or just right, medium rare, whatnot. So there were definitely rules that they placed on us for it to be fair. And I think people who watch the show or maybe don't fully understand still think like, oh, Christine had an advantage because she still had someone there to like help her. But I want to tell those people, like, do you know how difficult it is to meet someone that you've never met before and learn to communicate in such a way? And, I always think like people who are sighted, they can look at their pan and immediately know, okay, this steak is burnt, but I have to vocally ask her, say like, Cindy, is this steak now like really charred brown? And then she'll say yes, or she'll be like, it is still pink, and then, then she has to communicate that back to me. So it adds seconds on the clock. So to me, I think but I never wanted to have like, be considered like I had a leg up or an advantage. So I do believe in leveling the playing field in life, but I think for me, it was, I felt like I had to fight for things like 100, 200, 300% just to get, to feel like I was on their same playing field. So I think being someone who's visually impaired in the competition, it still felt like a disadvantage, but I appreciated that the producers provided me like different kitchen gadgets and things that would help me cook on the same level as the rest of the sighted folks.
Thanks, Christine.
Christine, thank you for sharing this. Can you tell us a little bit about how you went from the MasterChef experience and how that led you to the career that you have now? And just tell us a little bit about the work that you do now.
Sure. It's kind of crazy to think back and think how far like I've come and what my life is like. Like I know 20 years ago, if someone were to say, do you know that in 20 years you would be this, this, and this? I would be like, get out of here. I think for me, like when I auditioned and went on MasterChef, I had left my corporate career after I was dealing with all these health issues and then my diagnosis and then my vision loss. I ended up leaving the corporate world and I went back to grad school and I got a master's in fine arts and creative writing. So it was because my love for literature helped me get through those really dark times when I was dealing with the vision loss and when I was going through the paralysis and all I could listen to were audiobooks, and that was the only thing that helped me pass the time. So I decided to go back to school for creative writing, and then when I went on the show, I really went on thinking that, oh, I'm going to have a good story to write about when I come home, not thinking I would get as far as I did. I was just like, oh, I'm going to go on and Gordon might call me a donkey and cuss me out and I'll have a really good essay to like write and then get published and, kind of like this insider track to MasterChef or whatever. So I really went to just feed my creativity and have a good story, not expecting to get as far as I did. And then winning that season, of course, a lot of opportunities open up. I remember specifically one day the contestants that were left and I were getting into the casting van, and one of my friends / contestants was saying to me, you realize that after this show, regardless if you win or not, like it's going to be so much bigger than what you think it'll be. Like you're going to become so many people's like heroes or inspirations or whatever. And I was like, no, like I'm just me. And they said that's why like people like love to hear your story, because you're still just very down to earth, but you still project like this, I think this inspiring story and this motivational story. So the opportunities, yes, like culinary wise, it's given me the opportunities to do cooking shows, judge MasterChef Vietnam, do a lot of events, and eventually open up my own restaurants in Houston. But I think the bigger picture is it's given me a lot of opportunity to speak at panels like this, to advocate for eye health, for people with disabilities, vision impairment, for women, people of color. I think all of these things, the bigger message is now I've realized like my true purpose is, yes, winning MasterChef is great, the $250,000 prize is great, the cookbook deal is great, but now I see like I'm able to potentially affect people's lives in a positive way with my message and just being my true authentic self. And I think that's the true reward, I think, that came out of this.
Thank you.
Thank you. That's great, Christine. Well, they gave us these potential questions to ask, but time to throw the iPad away. Thinking back to when you were going through the diagnosis, and it sounds like it was a pretty challenging ordeal on so many levels. What do you wish you would have been able to say to eye health providers back then to help them make your journey an easier journey?
I think on the positive side, I had a fairly good experience with at least with my my vocational rehabilitation. I think with the diagnosis, and I think this goes for anything, not just the eye health or not just my situation, but I think the one important thing is as a patient, be very educated and advocate for your own well-being, because what I learned through the whole process is doctors are still humans themselves. Like I think growing up, of course, like I was a stereotypical Asian American child where my parents were like, you have to be a doctor. And I didn't want to go that route, but my parents always instilled in me the idea that doctors are like gods and they can heal people, which they can through science and medicine. And they always place this huge importance on how doctors like do these amazing things and it's the best career to have. So growing up, I think I had that image in my head, like, okay, something's wrong, I go to the doctor, that first doctor is immediately gonna know what's wrong with me and how to fix it. And that was not the case with my situation. It took probably 4 years for me to be correctly diagnosed, but even before that, like, I was in this nebulous stage of not knowing what I had. And I thought that was when I started realizing, like, not all doctors are the same. There's this funny joke on Seinfeld where it says, half of the doctors, 50% of doctors graduate in the bottom half of their class. But I kind of think, not to say that that's like going to, shed light on their career, their future path, but, you do, I think we place so much importance or so much, we put doctors on a pedestal. And what I realized through my process is that doctors are human, they're also fallible. But the best you can do is learn to communicate your symptoms and what your feelings are and what your needs are to your healthcare team so that they can do their job and then best diagnose you and treat you. So I wouldn't say like, I don't necessarily know like what my piece of advice is for other people, but I think it starts with the patient. I think as professionals in this industry, I think it's important to also listen to the patient. Patients, I feel like a lot of times I was dismissed with how I felt about myself, my symptoms, and I would say like, I remember at some point I was calling my neurologist and saying, I need to get these steroids like right now because I can tell I'm about to get an attack and it's going to be bad in a few days. And it would still take some time or whatever, and then sure enough, like I didn't get the medication in time, and then I had like a pretty serious attack. So I think a lot of times it's about open communication, and then listening clearly. And every patient and every doctor is different, so you kind of have to understand how to navigate that communication path as well. But I think just open communication, I think, is probably my advice for everybody in that situation.
Yeah, I think very much so. And whether we're talking the healthcare end of it or the rehab end of it, if we don't communicate on both sides, it's really hard for us to make positive outcomes. Thanks.
So thank you. This is Julia at the podium. Now it's our turn to ask questions. From the audience, we're going to steal the microphones from our moderators up front, and we'll have them focused around. So raise your hand if you'd like to ask a question, and we do ask that when you ask your question, you state your name, your affiliation, and then your short question.
Hi, Christy. This is Kira Baldonado with Prevent Blindness. And I wanted to ask, with your experience being able to win season 3 of MasterChef and open restaurants, do you engage other individuals with sight loss in your restaurants or your industry in any way to help elevate them?
Honestly, none have applied. I mean, there are other people with other sorts of abilities and disabilities that have applied, and I try to create an equitable and diverse workforce. A lot of visually impaired people have come to Dine, and I've definitely taught my staff how to treat someone with a vision impairment. So they know, just working with me, like how to guide me, how to explain things to me on a table. So they're very aware of that. But no, I mean, no one has applied to work for me that's visually impaired.
Thank you. We have a question from Dr. Chen at the front, and then Dr. Jaco behind him.
Hi, this is a fascinating talk, and thank you very much for being here. My name is Royce Chen. I'm from Columbia Ophthalmology, and I represent the NEHEP Planning Group. I'm just curious. I think we always have a bias as ophthalmologists and as doctors to forget about the other aspect of people's lives and about our people that have various visual disabilities, and think about how they get along in their daily lives. So I'm just curious how, in this process you were able to see and then you gradually lost more vision. Was that ever a barrier for you in terms of doing what you do now? And then how do you function on a day-to-day basis?
Sure. I think for me, my vision loss was gradual. It happened, my vision would get better, and then it would get worse, better, and then worse, over several years. So I guess the upside of that is it gave me time to adapt. But every time I would reach what I thought was my new baseline or my new normal, and then I would get used to doing things with that amount of vision, I would lose more. So that was kind of frustrating. But what I think I learned through that is the idea of resilience and learning to adapt quickly. And that I think through the whole process, I think our health and our lives are very precarious. You just never know in a moment when something may change. And I think the best thing you can do is, first of all, is still grieve that loss, because that's a normal process. Like losing your vision, you will go through a grieving process. And it's okay to feel all of those emotions and to recognize that. And then beyond that, I think it's important to surround yourself with a community or a network that can help, whether it's your eye care professionals, your healthcare team, your family, your spiritual community, your friends, whatever it is. I think people really try to help, but people may not know how. So I think it's up to us to be vocal and ask exactly for what we need or what we think we need. But I think, for me, I guess it just took time and just a lot of ups and downs and trying to learn to do the same things over and over again with less and less vision, like using a knife or how to deal with pots and pans on a stove, and just doing that over and over. I think and trying to master any skills about doing things over and over and learning from it. So I think for me, and I'm not quite sure if I'm answering your question, but I think I always tell people, when they say, I don't know if I'd be able to do the same things you did if I went through the same thing. But I'm like, well, you don't know that because you haven't gone through the same thing. But I do think we as humans are much more resilient than we often give ourselves credit for. I mean, look at how we were able to get through this COVID pandemic and still come out, pretty okay and somehow in some ways stronger than before. So I think it's a matter of willpower, surrounding yourself with the right people, and having that attitude, which I think that attitude just comes from going through the proper emotions of grieving as well and acknowledging that.
Thank you. Thank you for that. From the center.
Christine, I feel like you just told my story. Being told that I had MS by the University of Chicago Ophthalmology, by Mayo Clinic, and I felt too good. I just didn't believe it. And it was finally diagnosed by a low vision optometrist. I am the president of Miami Lighthouse for the Blind. How did I get to Miami? I had a daughter doing research with the Bascom Palmer Eye Institute, looking for human subjects related to technology, and said to me, Mom, try going to the Miami Lighthouse for the Blind. Maybe you could get some vision rehabilitation, because nobody up to that point ever mentioned vision rehabilitation. In fact, when she told me that, I said, well, whatever. Once I got to the Miami Lighthouse, I learned in 3 months every skill I needed to regain my executive leadership skills that I had as a sighted person at Purdue University. So I emphasize the importance of vision rehabilitation, and why is it that the leading institutions, Bascom Palmer Eye Institute, University of Chicago Ophthalmology, and Mayo Clinic never mentioned vision rehabilitation?
Thank you for your comment. I think we have a question over here. State your name, affiliation, and a short question.
Good morning. Is it on? My name is Dr. Tiffany Humes. I am an African-American female. It is on, okay. Slightly overweight. I'm wearing a green, bright green shirt, and I have straight hair that's pulled back into a bun. So my question was, as a woman of color and a first-generation American living in the South, did you feel that you were exposed to any institutional bias? And if so, did you feel that may have delayed your final diagnosis? These are real things.
Yeah, I honestly, I feel like maybe I was dismissed with some of my feelings, and when I tried to communicate with my original healthcare team about my symptoms and what I thought I was going through, but I think it was more because of perhaps my gender, yes, and I think my age. Ageism is a thing as well, and I think because I was so young, I was kind of dismissed, like, oh, well, she's still young, she doesn't have enough experience in life to know her body. And I think perhaps being female, yes. I don't think it was necessarily a race thing when I felt that, but I think it was mostly first stemming from age and then second stemming from my gender, yes.
Thank you.
Chef Ha, my name is Suber Wong. I'm from Cleveland in the great state of Ohio, and I'm an ophthalmologist. I'm a middle-aged Asian American with white pepper in my hair. My question has to do with your cooking. We often say that you first taste your food with your eyes, and as a chef, in terms of innovation and creativity, how do you approach continuing to evolve as a chef, new recipes and so forth? I know you mentioned originally that you were trying to recreate the taste that you had from your mother, but how do you continue to innovate as a culinary artist? And thanks for sharing your story. So inspirational. Thank you.
Sure. That's a good question because I've actually been asking myself that lately. I can always come up with new dishes by how they taste, and but I'm wondering over time, how does presentation change? I think about how once like square plates were in and then round plates are back and I don't necessarily know these trends. And this goes even with like fashion. So I'm just like, I don't know, like what's the trend or what are people leaning to? And like, I read about like the Pantone color of the year and things like that. And like what's, what people are doing in their kitchen and interior design of a restaurant. But I think that is something I do struggle with is to try to evolve my presentation and my plating with the times. I think for me, the process of plating, at least when I was on the show, I do attribute it to the fact that I used to have vision. So I would close my eyes and visualize how I want something to look on a plate. And I think about just the negative aspect of a plate. Like you don't want to fill the whole plate. You kind of want things to fill up maybe 1/3 of a plate so that it pops out visually. But that is something that I have been honestly like struggling with, is thinking about how does plating look nowadays? What is pleasing visually for people? But I think something that I offer on the flip side is that because I'm much less of a person that eats with my eyes first, I will always think about the nuances, that the small things that go into what a bite experience is like in your mouth. So the differences in temperature, the contrast in texture, the different flavors and taste profiles. Does it balance? So I think I'm much more keen and in tune with that aspect of eating a meal. And then I also think, of course, I think for those who are visually impaired, you can relate to me about the user friendliness of a dish. Like, it's like sometimes of a plate, those chefs that talk about how they use tweezers to plate everything, and then like it comes out to me, I'm like, I don't care, I only want to know if it tastes good. Or like a dish that's like very difficult to eat because there's things on your plate that you're not supposed to eat, and then like I don't know that as a visually impaired person. So I do think about the kind of the user experience of someone who's eating this dish. Like, is it very fussy or is it simple so that the focus is more on the taste of the food itself?
Thank you so much. This half hour went by so fast. I know there are still some questions out there. I know I had a few that I was hoping to get in as well, but thank you so much for spending this time with us and for cooking all those wonderful things for the people who get to enjoy them.
Thank you for having me, everyone.
National Eye Institute, NIH, National Eye Health Education Program, www.nei.nih.gov/NEHEP.